it intrigued me as to why was that? Why did people work so differently to me, and what was causing that? How do we, make sure that each person within our organisation feels, valued and feels heard and feels part of something? Welcome to our podcast. Thank you for joining us. My name's Emma Jordan and I'm the CEO of Infinite Consulting, and I'll introduce you to Sarah, my co-host.
Hi, my name's Sarah Brooks, and I'm the Managing Director of FICRA HR.
So today we want to talk to you about cultural intelligence. It's a topic that's close to my heart, but it's a topic that I think not enough people know about. So today we're going to enlighten you with some further information about why it's so important in this region.
Yeah, I have some cutting questions for you, Emma, to give us a bit more insight into cultural intelligence. And basically, if I can start by asking, what do you mean by cultural intelligence? What is it exactly, and why is it so important today?
So cultural intelligence is the ability to work and relate effectively with people from different cultures. So it goes beyond cultural awareness in terms of cultural awareness is just an awareness of a culture, whereas cultural intelligence is, and how do we use our intellect so that we can strategize on how we can be more effective when we're working with others.
Okay, and sorry, forgive me for being so particular, but when you talk about cultural intelligence, you mean the different nationalities that we're working from and that we're working with, and the diversity that's there?
Yeah, so a lot of people, when they talk about culture, they think we're talking about workplace culture, which absolutely cultural intelligence plays a key part of. It impacts the culture of the workplace. However, it is a separate topic. So cultural intelligence is the ability to work and relate effectively with people from different cultures, which is obviously really relevant in this region. And that can play out differently within different people, and that can ultimately impact the workplace culture.
Okay. So what led you to get interested in cultural intelligence?
So I've had the privilege of having a career that spans across lots of different continents. I've been an L&D professional for 15 plus years, but as you can hear from my accent, I'm from the UK, but most of that hasn't actually been necessarily based in the UK. A large proportion of my career has been working in continental Europe, or obviously more later over here in the Middle East since 2015. And that has really intrigued me in terms of exploring the way that different people work. When I started to work in different countries, I could approach things in entirely different ways to myself. And it intrigued me as to why was that? Why did people work so differently to me, and what was causing that? And that caused me to go away and research, and I learned about cultural intelligence, and I then became a qualified facilitator. So I now go into the corporate space and educate employees in what is cultural intelligence and why is it so important.
Okay, well, that's going to lead into my next questions with regards to this. And why is it, and we've got it abbreviated as CQ, and rather than saying cultural intelligence, why is CQ so important in the UAE? Obviously, it's a very multicultural city, but why is there that massive importance on this?
As you say, the UAE is so multicultural. If you're arriving in the UAE and you come from a different culture and you're a different national, then the way that you operate is going to be different to all of the other individuals that are based here in the UAE. But we're not just talking about Emirati culture, we're also talking about all of the other expats that are here in the region.
So how many nationalities are there for those people who are maybe not familiar with working in the UAE and the demographics? How many different nationalities are there currently working?
Well, it would be difficult to pinpoint, but to give you an example, one of my clients has 86 different nationalities working for them. So you can imagine what kind of headache that is for HR and the senior leadership team in terms of how do we make sure that each person within our organisation feels valued and feels heard and feels part of something.
Okay, gosh, that's a lot of people. I imagine the languages and everything that goes with that, as well as the cultural awareness. Can you give me a bit more detail around what exactly, and maybe use me as an example, as a fellow Brit, what makes up my cultural approach in work, just so that I think some of our listeners can maybe associate with exactly what we're talking about here?
Sure, yeah. So there is a number of different cultural frameworks that are out there, but the one that I work with has 10 different values that you can be assessed against. And so we're talking about things like the way in which you communicate, the way that you build relationships, the importance of working with others, like are you independent or are you interdependent? And so all of those things play a key part in, the way that you behave in the workplace.
So if you can maybe explain to me, please, some of the benefits that an organisation can expect to receive from bringing you in to look at the cultural intelligence in their organisation.
Yes, so when you've got a multicultural team, obviously everybody's approaching things in entirely different ways. So most organisations in this region are probably facing some sort of miscommunication amongst their team, or just general challenges where culture is at play, and it's the underlying issue, but perhaps they've not realised that that's what the issue is as an organisation. I'm able to come in and I can do things like carry out cultural intelligence assessments. I can do one-to-one coaching with individual team members, or I can offer cultural intelligence workshops, just so that as an organisation, the employees overall can become more aware of culture. And I think once you become more aware of your own culture, you can then suddenly start to see why you're facing those challenges. And rather than pushing further into your own culture and this is the way I do it and this is the way we're going to carry on doing it, you may be more willing to flex and think about altering your approach so that you can be more effective when you're working with people from different cultures.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I know from my own experience that I can definitely say that there have been those cultural intelligence challenges in companies that I've worked with as well. In terms of thinking about as an individual and cultural intelligence, you mentioned there that you do workshops, you do a cultural intelligence quiz test to assess the level of somebody's cultural intelligence, and it gives you certain metrics that people can work on. How can an individual work on their own cultural intelligence? What steps can they take? Is there any resources that we could use to develop our awareness and leverage what expertise or experience we have so far? Obviously, it's not going to get to the level that you would bring us up to, but just in that interim.
Yeah, I think so the assessment would be a great start to have completed the assessment so that they can then be aware of their own cultural value preferences.
Do you do that on a one-to-one basis? You do that outside of organisations as well?
Yes, so I do that one-to-one basis inside the corporate space. Thanks, Sarah. And I also, so I do that on a one-to-one basis and also in the corporate space. So, if an individual wants just to brush up on their cultural intelligence, or even just see what is my cultural intelligence like? Am I aware of my own cultural preferences, and how is that impacting the way I behave in the workplace? Then starting with the assessment enables them to identify what those values are, and then once you've identified your values, it then helps you to consider, okay, how is that impacting the way I behave, and how might I want to flex when I'm working with certain people? So as an example, I'm a direct communicator. So the fact that I'm now aware of that and hadn't perhaps in the past appreciated that, it enables me to recognise that when I'm working with people that are more indirect in the way that they communicate, they might find me quite blunt, abrupt and rude. Mm-hmm. Now, my intention isn't to be any of those things, but now I'm aware that that might be the way that I come across. When I'm dealing with indirect communicators, I can now consider, do I need to perhaps tone down the way that I message what I'm trying to say? Do I need to maybe come across in a more gentle way instead of being so explicit with the message, so that it doesn't appear like I'm being aggressive or being offensive to others?
Yeah, I can resonate with that one, absolutely. I've been told that many times myself. Okay, so Are there any strategies or practices that you can recommend? I mean, aside from doing the test with yourself and gauging where somebody sits at the moment, but what else can someone do? I mean, if I wanted to go and improve mine, not knowing where I stood, what approach could I take?
So I think it's important to think about the interactions that you're having on a daily basis. Where are you seeing stresses? Whether that's frustration on your part or frustration on another person's part. And then actually just pausing and thinking for a moment, what's causing this frustration? It might be that you recognise, it might be the communicative one we've just mentioned. It might be, hierarchy that's at play. It might be the individual's more hierarchical than you are, and maybe the way that you're communicating to them, they don't feel like they're being respected, and so that's causing some sort of friction between the two of you. Once you start to become more aware of those stresses, you can then start to think about, well, what are the actionable things that I can do to influence those interactions in the future? And then start to think about how you might alter that. So as an example, if you're an individual that's going into a meeting, often when we're going into a meeting, we may just be thinking about the agenda of the meeting. We're not necessarily thinking about who else is in the meeting, what is their culture, what are their cultural value preferences, and how is that going to influence the way that they're behaving in this meeting, the way that they're going to respond to the things that I say, the way that they're going to, share their input in a meeting. Do they feel comfortable that they can do that, or do they feel, have they been educated that you don't, share your input unless you're invited to do so? So there's lots of things that you can be thinking about ahead of interactions. But then whilst you're in the interaction, you can then be checking back and thinking, okay, what I perhaps thought might play out, is that what's happening, or is something different happening, and why might that be? And then again, you can, in the moment, start to think about how you might want to alter your approach. Because ultimately, as much as it is, adapting and flexing you as an individual, it does mean that you get then the most or the maximum out of an interaction with another.
And I'm presuming that this is about working with somebody's culture as opposed to trying to forcibly change their cultures and behaviours, because that's what a lot of people are, and it's a phrase that we hear, well, if they don't like the way I'm doing it, tough, they're just going to have to follow what I say. And we all know how that doesn't work. So it's more about having that collaborative approach on things, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you often find that if there's a dominant culture within a workplace, there's some expectation that everyone will just conform to that culture. But actually, if you're not, a culture is normally formed within an organisation because of perhaps where it's headquartered. If a business is headquartered in the UK, then the workplace culture in that organisation will be very UK-centric. But if you've then got nationals from other countries working in that organisation whose cultural values are very different, I suppose the question is it okay that you expect them to conform to your culture? Or actually, do we think that it would be more appropriate that we enable them to flex their own cultural values in that space? Because when you have kind of different value sets working together, you get a much greater level of, creativity and innovation because you just have a much broader perspective around the table, discussing and sharing ideas and thinking about, how we're going to deal with all the different business challenges that we're facing.
Okay, because I mean, like you mentioned there about the UK, and I know, we have so many rules and regulations. I mean, health and safety and everything else that's there that isn't. It kind of makes me think that that's actually quite a cultural aspect rather than obviously it's good business sense, but rather than it being it is actually part of the culture of the UK to be safe. Is that right? Am I getting that right?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can definitely say, I know that when I'm dealing with people from other cultures, they maybe make a joke about how, like, UK people are very...
Even the Brits make the same, the same
yeah,
joke.
we make the joke about ourselves, how particular we are about health and safety. So it might, but that might be down to across different cultures. What is the priority? Is the priority, the speed in which things are done, efficiency, or is the priority making sure that even if it's done more slowly, that it's done in a safe way? So, yes, there will be a cultural element at play in terms of, how a country might see health and safety.
Okay. And then I think coming on to my last question, but I'm sure we could talk around this for a long time. What are some of the unique cultural challenges that expatriates face working and living in the UAE? I mean, it's not just about work every day. I mean, you still face it even when you go to the supermarket, when you go to the restaurants and things, there is still that cultural interplay as well. So what are some of those that you could highlight for us?
I think when an expat arrives in the UAE, it can be quite daunting in terms of, just what might feel like a simple process to you, because in your head you understand how a process should be done, and that's based on your home culture. And then you come here and something's done in an entirely different way, whether that's trying to set up your utility bills, whether that's the way that you get served in a restaurant, whether it's not being able to understand, the side conversations that your colleagues are having in the office. It can be very, very daunting experience, and one that can take time to get used to. One or a couple that I can talk about. When I first arrived, I noticed that the UAE is very much more hierarchical than the UK is. And so when I was working with my team, there would be times where, I may have made a decision and they didn't necessarily challenge me. And then later it turns out that perhaps wasn't the right idea or the best decision. And ultimately the staff are on the front line, so they are closer to the work, and they understand perhaps better than I do about some of the decisions that might needed to have been made. But none of them felt that they could challenge me, because it would be out of turn to challenge the boss, because they come from a hierarchical culture. If the boss has said what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, that's the way that we're going to do it. We're not going to challenge. We're not going to share our own ideas or share our initiatives in order that we can look at doing something in a different way, because it would be inappropriate to do that. So that took a while to get used to. But once you then become familiar with that, you can then think about, okay, well, how does that work for us as a team? And what are we going to do when we all approach that slightly differently? As the leader of that team, I spoke to the team and said, look, guys, I really need you to, you're the eyes and ears on the ground. I need you to share your knowledge with me in terms of any ideas that you have. If you think my idea is not going to work or you have a better one, please feel the confidence to challenge me. You're not going to be reprimanded for that. And it will be okay to share your ideas so that we can then get the best, outcome for the team. That's just one example that I can share.
Okay, that's interesting. I've had similar experiences myself with leading teams and things. And I think one of the key things that I would just add to your thing is giving people the safety in the space that they're in to be able to speak up without retribution. And that makes a big difference to whether or not people will speak up and say things. And it's really important to be aware of that. I mean, I know one of the good bits of advice that I give to people when they come to the Middle East, at least into the UAE, is to just be patient and don't get stressed out, because there are some things that work absolutely seamlessly and brilliantly, and there are some things that don't. And it's just, that's how it is, and not to get frustrated with it. And manage your expectations. And again, that's, your expectations from your cultural background of where you're coming from and how things are done at home, and just accepting that it's different to what it is at home. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if I can just recap exactly, and please correct me if I've misunderstood something with regards to what is cultural intelligence. So every individual and every I want to say country or ethnicity has a culture that is derived from the attitudes and approaches that they are educated with or brought up with from their family, and the traditions of the country that they come from. Yeah. So it could be governmental, it could be anything, right? How they grow up as children, which school they go to, the education system, military service, whatever it might be, all molds how somebody behaves at work or behaves in their life. And once you understand the generalized modalities of that, so the different types of cultures, and which nationalities necessarily would fall into those different types and the behavior patterns of those types, you can then use those as your key to unlock a better style of management, of leadership, of performance, communication, and then outputs in a business setting to achieve the organizational targets and results that you're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately you could be, technically competent in your own country as a leader, but then when you move to the UAE and you're then leading, no longer leading a monocultural team, but you're now leading a multicultural team, your leadership style may not be as effective in this region. If you're from a flatter culture like myself, in the example I was giving earlier, and you're trying to lead a team that come from a much more hierarchical culture, there is going to be times when your way of leading isn't effective. It doesn't work. People that are hierarchical want very clear, explicit direction, and they want to be told how to do it, and then be kind of handheld through the steps of doing that, because that's the way that they've known it in the past. So if you're a leader and you're saying, okay, I need you to do this, off you go, get on with it, and you're giving people autonomy, which would be what you'd probably see in a flatter culture, that's quite scary. So it's really key that you become aware of what are your own cultural values, what are the cultural values of the people that I'm leading, or my peer group, or even your manager. Like if you want a really effective relationship with your manager, which ultimately might impact your career growth, then you need to be aware of what are their cultural values, and what are the differences between the two of us, what are the similarities, and what strategies can I put in place to make sure that when we interact with each other, that those interactions are effective, because I've thought about the way I'm going to communicate. I've thought about the way you're likely to respond in certain situations. And we've then, made sure that interaction is as good as it can be.
Emma, thank you so much for enlightening me and our listeners as to what cultural intelligence is. It's given me, the more I talk with you about this subject, the more and better understanding I have of my own capacity and my own cultural awareness. And I really need to do the test with you and get some coaching, not because I'm bad, but because I want to improve, because we can all do better. But it's really helped me understand and get interested in this cultural aspect to work, and it explains an awful lot. Every time we talk, there's something where a little light bulb goes off in my head going, all right, that'll be why that happened. Okay, now I understand. And equally, with myself and my work that I do with different clients, it helps me understand why things happen in certain ways, and sort of being able to forecast, as it were, responses to my statements and actions and things like this. So I can definitely hand on heart say that it's a useful tool to have in the business. And I'm sure many others will follow suit and agree with me once they've learnt